Hello everyone and welcome to the biology lecture series, and today we'll be discussing the topic heredity and variation. Alright, so in this lecture I will introduce you these terms heredity as well as the inheritance, and then we'll study about the variation. So we'll understand what is variation and what are the causes of the variation. Clear? And then we'll talk about the heredity and inheritance during the asexual as well as the sexual reproduction. Clear? So let's start with the lecture. So let's talk about heredity first. So heredity refers to the passing of the genetic information and traits from the parents to the offsprings. So here what is happening? The information, the genetic information, which is stored in the DNA, or you can say the chromosomes. The chromosomes, they contain DNA only. So the transfer of the genetic information as well as the traits. So these traits, they are determined by the, you can say the genome of the organisms, or you can say the genes, all right, or the DNA. Okay, so the passing of the information and the traits from the parents to the offsprings or the progeny, this is known as the heredity. Now, it is the transmission of the characteristic from one generation to the next generation through the genetic materials. Here, I've already told you DNA is involved here. So DNA is the genetic material. It is the one of the nucleic acids. Clear? Another is the RNA. All right, but DNA is the genetic material. DNA is deoxyribose nucleic acid. Okay, so this DNA, which is contained in the reproductive cell, all right, this is transferred from one generation to the another generation. And what are these reproductive cells? Sperm, okay, which is haploid, as well as the egg, which is again haploid, means they contain 23 chromosomes. Clear? They contain 23 chromosomes. Clear? Now, the sperm and the egg, they fuse together in the process known as fertilization, and then they form a diploid structure known as the zygote, which develops to form the embryo, and the embryo then divides to form the, or you can say differentiate to form the new individual. Clear? So these traits, or you can say the characteristic, these are transferred from one generation to the another generation through the DNA. Now, the term heredity, it generally refers to the trait or the characteristic or the conditions that are passed down from one generation to the next generation, okay, through the genetic inheritance. One generation to next generation means from the parent to the progeny. Clear? Now, you must be having a clear idea about the heredity. Now, let's study about the genetics. So what is genetics? Study of the heredity as well as the variation. This is known as the genetics. Clear? So study of the heredity and the variation, this is known as genetics. Now the term genetics were first of all used by W. Bateson in 1905. Alright, but the Mendel, Gregor Johann Mendel, he is known as the father of genetics. So Gregor Johann Mendel, he was an Australian monk, okay, and he was the first person to study the genetics. That's why he is regarded as the father of the genetics. Now the second term is variation. So variation, they refers to the differences or the changes in the characteristic or the traits within a population or among the individuals of the same species. Okay, so the variations can be, okay, within a populations or among the individuals of the same species. Now these differences, okay, can be observed in various aspects, including physical differences, behavioral differences, either in the genetic makeup, all right, this is clear, or there can be differences in the environmental response, means response to any environmental stimulus. Clear? Now what are physical differences or the physical features? This represents the external features, means differences in the external features, or you can say the morphological. Morphology means the external features. Clear? Now, the variations, they can be of two type. First kind of variation is the somatic variation, which takes place in the somatic cells. Okay, these take place in the somatic cells, and the germinal variation, it takes place in the germ cells. All right. So now let's study about each of this variation in detail. So first is the somatic variation. Now, somatic variation, it affects the somatic cells of an organism. Okay, so the variation takes place in the somatic cells. So the somatic cells are also known as the vegetative cells. Okay, so because here there is a variation in the somatic cells, so these variations are not transmitted to the next generation. Okay, and they die with the death of the individual. So these variations, these are neither inherited from the parents or nor they are transmitted to the next generation. Means they are not transferred or transmitted from the parent to the offsprings. Clear? Now, these somatic variation, it is acquired by the individual during its lifetime. All right, and it is lost with the death of the organisms. So that's why somatic variation, they are also known as the acquired variation. Clear? Because they are acquired by the individual during its own life. Okay, and the variation are in the somatic cells. Clear? Now the somatic variations, they are due to, first one is the environment. Okay, so it can be due to the environment or the effects of the environment. Now this includes the factors that affect the organism. Okay, and these factors are food, air, pressure, as well as the humidity. So these are some of the environmental factors that may cause the somatic variations. Clear? Now, environmental effects, okay, all the organisms. All right, so both the plants and the animals, and you can say the different kind of organisms. So there is a lot of biodiversity. Okay, we have bacteria, we have the lower organisms, okay, lower animals as well as the plant. All right, then we have the higher and the complex organisms. So this environment affects all kinds of organism, means it affects the entire biodiversity. Okay, especially the plants. So plants, they are not able to move, they are still. Okay, so these plants, they are quite heavily affected by the environmental factors because they cannot move or they cannot hide themselves. So plant have to tolerate these kind of stresses, or they have to deal with this environmental factors such as food, okay, availability of the food, you can say, the quality of the air. Okay, so there can be pollutants in the air also. All right, and there can be difference in the carbon dioxide level and the oxygen level. Then the pressure, all right, pressure of the air, and then atmospheric pressure, you can say, and then the humidity also. This also plays a crucial role in generating the somatic variations. Clear? Now, one of the environmental factor, let's talk about the light. So the strong sunlight, it affects the human skin. All right, so light is an environmental factor, it is an external factor. So you must have seen the human skin, it get darken. All right, whenever it is exposed to the strong sunlight or high intensity of the light. And why it's become little bit darken? Because of the production of the dark pigment known as the melanin, which are produced in the epidermal cells. Okay, now this melanin, what is the role of the melanin? Why its level increase? Because the melanin protects the underlying cells by absorbing the ultraviolet rays of the sun. So the sunlight, it consists of the ultraviolet rays. So this melanin pigments protect the skin from the ultraviolet rays. Now the plant grown in the shade, it become weak as well as pale and acquire long internodes and broad leaves. Okay, so this was about the, you can say, the human or the man, where the melanin increases in the when the skin is exposed to high light intensity. But if we talk about the plants, and if the plants are, if they are supposed they are grown in the shade, or they are grown in the absence of light, okay, so these plants, these are known as etiolated plants. Okay, these are known as etiolated plants or etiolated seedlings. So these are those plants which are grown in shade. These are grown in the shade. Okay, so because they are grown in the shade, these plants are quite weak and they are pale. Because there is no sunlight, so there is less photosynthesis, you can say. There is less photosynthesis. Okay, because for photosynthesis, a particular amount of sunlight is required. Then they are pale. They will be pale. Why? Because of the lack of chlorophyll. So in the absence of the light, or when the plants are grown in the shade, they are pale. Okay, why they are pale? Because of the lack of the chlorophyll. And what happens? They will have long internodes. Long internodes, why? Because of the elongation of the stem. Okay, the stem will elongate. And why will the stem elongate? The stem will elongate to acquire the sunlight. Clear? So you know the stem, it consists of the node and the internode, and the elongation of the internode takes place. And that's why the elongation of stem will take place, and it is done because to acquire more sunlight. Clear? So, and the leaves will also be broad. Why the leaves will be broad? Again, to acquire or to absorb more sunlight. So if the leaves are broad, the surface area will be more, and it will be able to absorb more sunlight. So these are the adaptations that are occurring in the plants that are growing in the shade region. Okay, this is clear. Broad leaves means more surface area. Okay, more surface area. Clear? Now, habitat. Next one is the habitat. So habitat also affects the genetic makeup of the individuals, and it leads to the variations as well. Now, why there is variation because of the habitat? By the process known as natural selection, which was given by Charles Darwin. So this natural selection, it describes how certain traits, it become more, either they can become more or they can become less common in a population over time due to their effects on the survival and the reproduction in a given environment. Alright, so only those traits are selected, okay, which help the organisms to survive and reproduce when the environment is changing, or the traits which help the organism to adapt to the changing environment, those traits will be favored, and the rest of the trait, they will be lost. All right, so we can say the certain traits, they may become more. All right, which traits will become more? That will help in the adaptation. Okay, that will help to adapt. Those traits will be or those traits will increase in the number. Clear? Now, habitat, we were talking about habitat also. So one example can be forest habitat. So in forest habitat, what is happening? There is a lot of challenges. Okay, so there is a competition for the nutrition, competition for the air as well. All right, so if we talk about the habitat, so if we take the example of the forest habitat, okay, so in forest habitat, there is a lot of competition, there is a lot of challenges. Okay, so there is competition for the air, water, nutrients. Okay, so if the plant is able to you can tolerate all these challenges. Okay, so it has traits which allow it to tolerate all these challenges, then those traits will be favored. All right, so this was the first condition. Second, okay, second will be there is a habitat fragmentation. So because of some physical barrier, okay, because of a physical barrier, what will happen? The habitat will be segregated. So this will lead to habitat, you can say, segregation. Okay, so now these two habitats, all right, so initially it was one habitat, then there was a separation due to a physical barrier. Then what will happen? There will be, so there is a geographical barrier here. Okay, so somehow there was a geographical barrier. Okay, now these two, okay, are geographically isolated and there is no gene flow. And here there will be no gene flow. Okay, and then this will become one species. Okay, this is species 1 and this is the species 2. Okay, so variations will accumulate, all right, and then this variation will accumulate and it will form a new species. Clear? Now next is the nutrition. Now let's talk about the nutrition. Now it is also one of the various factors that cause the variations, and the nutrition, it directly affects the development and the expression of the phenotypic traits. Okay, means the external traits, you can say. Example, inadequate nutrition during the critical periods of the growth and the development can result in stunted growth and delayed maturation. Clear? Now, conversely, optimal nutrition, it can support healthy growth as well as the development, leading to the individuals with different physical characteristics within the population. Clear? So this is the role of nutrition, okay, in generating the variations. Clear? Now next is the use and disuse of the organs. So this can also cause variations. Okay, first was the environment. Okay, then we have the use and disuse of the organs. So continuous use of the organ, it will make it better developed, whereas the constant disuse of the organ will make it reduced. Clear? So you have vestigial organs also that we don't use now. Now, conscious efforts. Next is the conscious efforts. So conscious efforts by man produce the somatic variations in the humans. All right. And it also causes variations in the domestic animals and the plants. Okay, this is clear. Let's talk about this conscious efforts. What are these conscious efforts? So first one is the environmental exposure. So humans as well as animals and the plants, they can be exposed to environmental factors such as the radiation, pollutants, chemicals, all right, which can increase the risk of the somatic mutations, thus leading to the variation. Okay, so in the environment, there are a lot of, you can say, pollutants. All right, if we talk about air pollution also, there are a lot of heavy metals. Okay, if we talk about water pollution also, there are a lot of heavy metals. All right, there are a lot of pollution in the air also. We have sulfur dioxide and other toxic gases. Then radiations also. The humans can be exposed to radiations. All right, they can be exposed to chemicals and the toxins, and all of these can cause the changes in the somatic cells, leading to somatic mutations. One of the radiations can be UV radiations. All right. Now humans, they are exposed to a lot of radiations also. All right. Whenever they go for a medical test, then also they are exposed to the radiations. All right. X-rays also. X-rays are also kind of radiations. Now next is the lifestyle choices. Now certain human lifestyle choices such as the smoking and excessive alcohol consumption or unhealthy diet, it can impact the cellular processes and the DNA integrity. Okay, thus leading to the somatic mutations, which will cause somatic variation. Now, next is the cultivation practices. Now, if we talk about the plant, the agriculture practices, including the use of the pesticides, fertilizers, and other chemicals, they may expose plants to mutagenic substances, all right, potentially leading to the somatic variations. Clear? Now, next one is selective breeding. Okay, selective breeding, you can also call it as artificial breeding. So here what happens, the selective breeding practices in agriculture or animal husbandry, it can indirectly influence the prevalence of the certain somatic variations within the populations by selection of a desired trait. So what we do during the animal husbandry, which is a kind of artificial or the man-made breeding, so here we select the certain traits. Okay, so these traits are known as the desired traits. And what happens? We select these traits, and these traits will be present in the progeny, all right, and or the offerings you can say, and this can lead to somatic variations. So because we are selecting certain traits only and we are neglecting the other traits, all right, so this may also lead to somatic variations. Now let's talk about the second type of variation, which is the germinal variation. So till now we were talking about the somatal variation. Now we'll talk about the germinal variation. Now this variation affects the germ cells. Okay. Now germ cells of the organisms are affected, and because of this they are inheritable. Okay. So germinal variation is also known as the blastogenic variation. Now it is received by the individual from the parents and is transmitted to the next generation. Means this kind of variations which takes place in the germ cells, they are transmitted from the parent to the progeny. Now germinal variations, again it is of two types. First is the continuous variations, also known as the fluctuating variations. Now what is this continuous variation? So the continuous variations, they are very common in nature, and these are found in all animals and the plants, and they affect all their organs. Now these variations are quite unstable and they do not contribute to the formation of new species. Clear? Because these variations are unstable. Okay, that's why they are lost and they don't contribute to the formation of the new species, and they are lost, all right, because they are unstable and they don't accumulate over the time. Okay, so a new species developed when the variations accumulate over the time, but these continuous variations, these are quite unstable and they don't contribute to the formation of the new species. Now let's study about the cause of the continuous variations. Now here, new combination of the characters, this can lead to the continuous variations. Okay, so because of the combination of the traits or the character. So now the traits had been combined together, and in the progeny, but the progeny will have all these combined characters. So this leads to the variation. Second one is because of the crossing over. So what is crossing over? Recombination of the genes, or crossing over leads to recombination of the gene. So you must be knowing about meiosis. Okay, also known as the reductional division. So during meiosis, what happens during the Pachytene stage? Crossing over takes place. So because of the crossing over, what is crossing over? Due to crossing over leads to the exchange of the genetic material. So you can write during crossing over what happens? Exchange of genetic material. Clear? Now, due to crossing over as well as the recombination which takes place during the meiosis, it leads to the development of the variations. Alright. Again, here the traits are being recombined. Okay, there is a recombination, and this you can see the progeny is a type of recombinant. It consists of the genetic or the genome of both the parents. All right, so this leads to continuous variation. Next is the discontinuous variations. Now, this variation refers to large conspicuous differences of the offerings from the parent. All right, so there is a very significant differences. Large conspicuous means there is a significant difference. Okay, now this variation is also known as the mutation. So it is because of the mutations. And what are mutations? They are sudden, okay, changes. So mutation is quite sudden and rapid. All right, so this variation is also known as the mutation, and the individual with this kind of variation, they are known as the mutant. So the individual with the mutation, this is known as the mutant. Now this is not very common in nature. All right, most of the mutations, they are recessive. So most of the mutations, they are recessive. Okay, means they are not expressed. All right, and they are usually recessive, and the dominant allele, all right, it will suppress this recessive gene. Clear? And there are a lot of other things because of which these mutations are recessive. So if you know about the codon, all right, so suppose AUG is the codon that codes for methionine. So what happens? So this last base, this is known as the wobble base. Okay, this is known as the wobble base. So if there is a change at this third base, okay, at this third place, then there are chances that it will code for the same amino acid only. Okay, so because of this, these mutations, they are, you can say, not expressed in the individuals. Clear? Now it appears suddenly. So there are sudden heritable changes. Okay, and it is stable and it is inheritable. Clear? Now, what are the causes of discontinuous variations? So the modification in the structure of the chromosomes, this can lead to discontinuous variations. All right, so chromosomes, they consist of the, you can say, genes or the DNA, and if there is modification in the structure of the chromosomes, so usually the chromosomes, all right, have this structure. Okay, there are two chromatids, and in the center we have the centromere. Okay, so these are the chromatids. Clear? So if there is a change in the structure of the chromosome, this can also lead to the discontinuous variation. Clear? Now next is the alteration in the chemical nature of the genes. All right, this can also lead to the variations. So chemical nature means so genes, they are made up of DNA only. So if there is a change in the DNA, or you can say if there is a change in the codon, okay, change in codon you can say, okay, or change in the nitrogenous base. If the chemical nature of the genes change, then also it can cause the discontinuous variations. All right, like I've told you, AUG is codes for methionine. So if A is replaced by some other nitrogenous base, then it will code for some another amino acids. So this means the alternation in the chemical nature of the genes, or you can say change in the biochemical nature. All right, change in the codon I have written, or you can say change in the nitrogenous bases. Okay. Now next is the change in the number of the chromosomes. If the number of chromosomes also change, then it can also lead to discontinuous variations. So usually the normal number of chromosomes is 46. Okay, but sometimes what can happen, there can be decrease in the number of chromosomes, or there can be increase in the number of the chromosomes, or sometimes what happens, the entire chromosome set, it can double. Okay, so either there is a you can say decrease in one chromosome is lost, all right, or sometimes one chromosome is increased. So disease is there in which the trisomy of the 21st chromosome takes place. All right, so what happens? The additional one chromosome is added. Alright, so 21 chromosomes, there are 321 chromosomes. This is known as the trisomy of the 21 chromosome. This can also lead to the discontinuous variation. Okay, next is the radiations and the chemicals. It may also cause the mutations. Clear? So there are a lot of radiations such as UV radiations and X-rays. Alright, and there are a lot of chemicals that are known as the mutagen. So these chemicals that cause the mutation, these are known as mutagens. Clear? So these are the causes of the discontinuous variations. Now what is the significance of the variations? Alright, what is the importance of these variations? Now variations enable the organisms to adapt themselves to the changing environment. Alright, so the environment is always changing. Now to adapt to these changes, there should be some variations. So if the environment is changing, then accordingly, if the organism is not able to adapt the environment, then it will get extinct. Alright, so these variations, this helps to adapt to the environment. Okay, example can be if there was a colony of the bacteria, alright, and you add the antibiotic resistant. Okay, and what happens due to variations or due to mutations, you can say, if some of the bacteria, they become resistant to this antibiotic, so those bacteria will be selected. Alright, so the environment has changed, you have added the antibiotic, and those bacteria in which there was some variations due to the mutations, alright, they will be able to adapt, and they will survive, and their numbers will increase. Clear? So this is how variations, they enable the organism to survive to the changing environment. Clear? So if there was a bacterial colony, then if you add the antibiotic, then what will happen? Only those bacteria will survive, okay, that have antibiotic resistant trait, okay, or antibiotic resistant gene. Clear? Okay, and this antibiotic resistant gene, it was how it came? It came due to the mutations. So there was a variation. So these variations was already present in the bacterial colony. Because of this mutation, or this mutation leads to variations, and these variations help some of the bacterial colony to survive. Okay, what was this variation? The presence of the antibiotic resistant genes in some bacteria. Now next is, it forms the raw material for the evolutions. So now evolution of the new species takes place when the variations get accumulated, and these variations get accumulated over the time and lead to the evolution of a new species. Now it enables the organisms to face the struggle for the existence in a better way. Okay, so there is always a struggle for the existence, okay, and the organisms or the individuals which are able to adapt to the changing environment, okay, that will be the number of those individuals will increase, okay, and they will be naturally selected. Clear? So there is lot of competition, okay, for food, for air, for nutrients, for water, all right, and those organisms that are able to tolerate or these challenges, all right, these organisms or the individual, they will be selected to all right, and their number will increase in the next generation. Clear? Now it helps the men in improving the races of useful animals and plants as well. Okay, so we have already seen that during the artificial breeding, all right, or animal husbandry, certain traits are selected, all right, and these traits are selected, and the progeny which is produced, that will have all the desired traits, and that will be called as the improved variety. So same goes for plants also. Okay, we can select the traits that we want in the progeny, all right, and we will get a improved variety. Now, next is it is the basis of the heredity. Clear? So because of these variations, or we can say variations forms the basis of the heredity. Clear? Because the variations, they will accumulate and it will lead to the evolution of the species, and these variations, they are transferred or transmitted from one generation to the another generation. Okay. Now next is it also leads to the existence of the new trait. Okay. So because of variations, new traits arise. Like I've already told you, the example of the antibiotic resistant bacteria. Okay. Or you can say this antibiotic resistance, this was a new trait. Okay. This was a new trait that arose due to the mutation. Okay, so because of this mutation, there was a variation and it led to the development of a new trait, okay, which is antibiotic resistance. So initially, again, the bacterial colony, okay, it doesn't had this antibiotic resistance. Then what happened? We added antibiotic to the medium, and then due to some mutations, a new trait arose, which is the antibiotic resistance. All right. So now the individuals or the bacteria which had this antibiotic resistance gene or the character, that were able to survive. So variations, okay, they help in the development of new traits. Clear? Now let's talk about heredity and variation in the asexual reproduction. So asexual reproduction, we already know it involves only one parent, okay, and the progeny produced is genetically similar to the parent. Now this occurs in the lower organisms such as bacteria, amoeba, euglena, and the fungi. Okay. Now it also occurs in the plants such as rose as well as the sugarcane. So sugarcane or in the rose, the asexual reproduction takes place by the phenomena or the process of vegetative propagation. So vegetative propagation is a type of asexual reproduction. Okay, so here what happens? The stem cuttings, okay, stem cuttings are used, okay, and the stem cuttings, they develop into a new plant. Okay, so in vegetative propagation, what happens? How can you define it? So it is the development of a new plant from the parts of the plant such as root, stem, and the branches. So here, the entire organism, it developed from the stem cuttings. All right, asexual reproduction also takes place in the hydra. So hydra, okay, with the help of budding. Okay, so hydra reproduces with the help of budding, which is a type of asexual reproduction. If we talk about planaria, so here regeneration takes place. So planaria, it divides by the process of regeneration. So planaria, it cuts itself into two halves, and the two halves, it generates into, or it develops into, new entire individual. Now this asexual reproduction is monoparental, meaning it is uniparental, and the organism produced by it inherits all the traits of the single parent. So only single parent is involved. All right. So the offerings or the progeny, it will inherit all the traits of the single parent. Okay. So there is no variation, you can say. There is no variation. Okay. And the progeny, it is the carbon copy of the parent and it is known as the clone. So it is genetically similar to the parent and this is known as the clone. Now it is also known as the clonal reproduction because here clones are being produced. Now here one thing to be noted is that the term offering is not used in the case of asexual reproduction. You have to use progeny. Now the clones may develop variations also. How they can develop variations? By the environmental factors or by the mutations. So here in asexual reproduction, what happens? The clones are produced, but sometimes the clones may also develop variations due to the environmental factors such as radiations and the chemicals. Okay. So if they are exposed to radiations or they are exposed to some mutagen, which are the chemicals that bring on mutations, then They may develop variations. Another way of developing variations is mutations. So there can be single base pair mutations. All right. So these mutations can lead to variations. Now the variations caused due to the environmental factors are not transferable, but these variations which are caused by the mutations are stable and inheritable. Clear? Now let's talk about heredity and variation in the sexual reproduction. Now variations is very much common in the animals and the plants which carry reproduction by the means of sexual means. So during sexual reproduction, two parents are involved. So it is biparental, okay, and the offerings, they get the chromosomes, you can say, or the genetic material from both the parent. Clear? So here it involves the formation of gametes also. So one male gamete is formed, which is known, if you talk about the humans, a male gamete is formed, which is known as the sperm, and the female gamete, it is known as the egg cell or the ovum. So they fuse with each other. Okay. So the sperm, it fuses with the ovum. Both of these has haploid number of the chromosomes. They fuse together to form the zygote. Okay. So here in the sperm, 23 chromosomes will be present. And in the ovary also, 23 chromosomes will be present. And in the zygote, 46 chromosomes will be present. All right. And during sexual reproduction, meiosis also takes place. And we have already discussed meiosis involves recombination and crossing over. So this leads to variation and formation of a new species. Now the reason for this is the sexual reproduction is biparental, and the offerings receive some traits from one parent and some traits from the other parent. Now interbreeding of closely related individuals, it reduces the occurrence of the variations in the offerings produced by the sexual reproduction. Okay, so if there is an interbreeding of closely related individuals, so closely related individuals, they will have you can say similar genetic material. All right, or they will be genetically similar as related to the distantly related individuals. So this will reduce the occurrence of the variations. Okay, because both, if they are closely related, means at the genetic level they are quite similar. So it will reduce the variation. All right, clear? All right, so this was the end of this session. So in this session, we discussed about the heredity and the inheritance, and we talked about the variations and what are the types of variations. We talked about the somatic as well as the germinal variations. Okay, so about rest of the topics we'll discuss in the next lecture. Hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you very much for listening.